Hi folks, and welcome back to the Scotch Tacker. Joining us today is Lisa Klink, who wrote the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode Hippocratic Oath, as well as many episodes of Star Trek Voyager. Welcome Lisa, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Cool. Yeah. Hi everybody.
Hi everyone, once again.
Yeah.
So, Lisa, I've heard you say in other interviews that you originally arrived in Hollywood with aspirations of directing action movies like Terminator 2. While you were thinking that way, did any plots occur to you that you'd be interested in directing, or was it only after that phase that you began devising story ideas?
It was really after that I started writing. I came out here wanting to direct, but then I worked for a director and realized that I didn't want to be interpreting other people's stories. I wanted to be telling my own stories. And I wanted to be in kind of earlier on the process. And so that's when I decided to start writing.
Cool. So do you remember the first Star Trek episode or film you ever saw?
Not the first one, but I remember going to see Star Wars. I remember my dad taking me to see it. That made a big impact.
Which movie did you see?
Star Wars.
Oh, the first one? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New Hope.
Oh,
yes.
Yes. Awesome.
Perhaps you could explain the script writing process. What decided if the end stage of each episode's script was a final draft or a revised final draft? Or revised final draft, I guess.
Well, on Voyager, we had a writer's room. And so you bring in an idea, or maybe it would come from a pitch, and the writers would all sit together in a room. I think at the time when I was there were 5 writers. We would sit there in a room, and we would have a big whiteboard, and an intern or an assistant would stand there with a dry erase marker, and we would break down the story. What happens in scene 1, who's in it, what goes on, what happens at the end of Act 1, and break it down into scenes. And then you would take that outline, and the writer would go off and write a first draft. Then you come back and get, feedback and all that, and it would go up to Rick Berman. He was kind of the final say on all things Star Trek. And so he's the one that would decide when it was done.
It was the voice of Star Trek.
It was. It really was.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, I have a question. Okay. I am a huge Q fan. And I saw that you did work on Q in the Gray. And I was wondering if you could talk about working on that episode in particular, because that episode, it was really intriguing for me as a fan to learn more and see more of the inner workings of the continuum. So I wanted to
I didn't actually work on that.
Oh, you didn't work on that? Okay. Because it was on the internet that you had some type of workings on it.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
So, but you did work as a story editor and executive story editor in Voyager's 3rd and 4th seasons, respectively. What did those jobs entail?
Well, it doesn't actually give more responsibilities. It's really an indication of seniority. It isn't until you get up into the co-executive producer, realm that you really actually have more responsibilities. In this case, it was writing scripts and giving feedback on other people's scripts, and the same thing.
Cool.
Nice.
Were you able to visit the set of Hippocratic Oath or any of your Voyager episodes while they were in production?
Yes, absolutely. Going down to the set was always a bunch of fun.
Okay.
And we were lucky because our writing offices were on the Paramount lot. And so we could just walk down to the soundstage whenever we wanted to. And I've been on other shows that film in different countries, and you never get down to the set at all. And so I really took advantage of the opportunity, to walk across the Paramount lot. And I remember going to the set of Hippocratic Oath, my first produced episode ever, and just being astonished. I thought of it, and there it was.
Right.
And it was,
so as a writer, that had to be really huge. Like what I thought is now here.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and it was amazing. It was
Right.
in front of me. I could reach out and touch it.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
I saw that you were involved with writing for the Star Trek Experience, which I was at twice, and it was incredible. I have such fond memories of that. And you were involved with the Borg Invasion 4D. Tell me what that must have been like, and I'm sure you were there for it. To see the results.
Yes.
Probably 1,000 times if you're anything like that.
That was a lot of fun, actually. They approached me to write the story for it, and it had never occurred to me before that somebody actually has to write these rides. I mean, because it wasn't really a ride; it was a theater experience.
Yeah.
It was 4D, and so I had to write. Fortunately, we had Robert Picardo as the doctor, and so I got to write a bunch of fun dialogue for him while the audience is waiting in line and sort of explaining what's going on. And then I got to write the Borg and the Borg Queen. And that was a bunch of fun.
Yeah, because my question, bouncing off of Bob, because I'm glad he led into that, because I wanted to know, like, was there like a different way that you had to write for, like, because that's a ride, okay? That's not like, sitting in front of TV watching a show. Like, there's like, to get that reaction from the audience. Like, was there like you had to think like a little differently on like writing that? And if so, can you talk about that?
Because it was 4D, they wanted to include other sensory experiences. They would have, cold, and they had things in the seats that would kind of poke you in the back or poke you in the arms. And I remember a lot of discussion about, there's a moment, spoiler alert, where the Borg Queen basically shoots out her fingers at you, at the audience, and it comes at you in 3D, and then it like pokes you in the back, like as if, her claws have reached you. And I remember a lot of discussion about how scary can we make that exactly before we give somebody a heart attack. And we settled on pretty scary. I mean, it's actually pretty unsettling when that happens in 4D.
Were you involved in any of the casting sessions at all, such as for 7 of 9 or any of the cast members in the episodes that you wrote?
Well, not for the major cast like 7 of 9, but for the guest cast in each episode, then yes, I was in on the casting sessions, which again was just fun. It was really interesting to see all the different interpretations and what the actors came in with, and what the producers liked and didn't like.
Are there some characters that you found easier to write for than others?
I'm sorry?
Were there some characters that you found easier to write for than others?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I always found it easy to write for, everybody liked writing for the Doctor because Robert Picardo would just make anything funny. And, and also he was kind of the only character that had a lot of humor. And so he was always a lot of fun to write for. Writing for Janeway was actually always fun and fairly easy because she had a really distinct voice. That's what makes it easier to write for a character is if they sound really distinct from the other characters. It's like the way Tuvok was easier to write for because a Vulcan voice sounds very different than like Anna, the half Klingon. So I found him easy to write for as well.
Was there any particular episode that you found particularly challenging and for whatever reason that felt like this isn't working, I got to rework it, or I have to change something maybe because of a cast member, or you found you had to redo the dialogue or something like that?
There were several. That was more not as rare as I would like it to be, because often it would be practical considerations, like you couldn't build that set, or that actor wasn't available, and then you would have to readjust it. And we were always making readjustments right up until the time of filming, even minor dialogue adjustments while we were filming, for the next day's shooting, that sort of thing. So it was always a work in progress. It wasn't done until the finished show was actually edited and on the air.
Well, in preparation for this interview, I basically read almost all the final drafts of each episode that you'd written. I was surprised by how much some of them had changed for the Voyager scripts. When you were involved in the writing of the Deep Space Nine episodes Hippocratic Oath, were you aware of the specifics of the story outline which had been submitted by Nicholas Correa and formed part of the genesis of that episode's story?
I wasn't in on the pitch, but when we were breaking down Hippocratic Oath, it was with all the Deep Space Nine writers, and they were familiar with that story, and so they kind of contributed those elements.
Awesome.
Do you recall his idea?
Than a Voyager? I'm sorry.
Sorry, what was that
Go ahead,
question,
Bob.
Bob?
I was just asking how different it was from writing, say, for Voyager as opposed to Deep Space Nine. Like, what was the process?
Good question.
A little different then? You said there was a script meeting with Voyager, but was DS9 similar or was it a little different?
It was pretty much the same. All the Star Trek shows worked pretty much the same way as I understood it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, awesome.
Uh,
And can you
do you-
talk about just taking a break from the Star Trek? Can you talk about like your Hercules, writing for Hercules?
Yeah.
That was just fun.
That
show was just a hoot.
I enjoyed that show.
Yeah, that was just fun.
Right.
You know, again, I was lucky that I had the chance to do that. You know, after Voyager, you know, I guess they'd seen the script of mine and called me in, you know, to write a couple of freelance episodes.
Right.
I had a really good time doing that. But again, that show shot in New Zealand, and
Right.
so I never had the chance to go down to the set or meet any of the
Right.
actors. So it was, you know, that was a bummer.
Right.
Likewise, Painkiller Jane. I was a fan of that. I was sad that it didn't go as long as I had hoped it would. I think it was only one season, and I'm a big fan of Christina Locken. So, you know, maybe you can share a little bit about writing for that show.
That was also a really good experience. A friend of mine brought me in to write some episodes for that. And I remember the writing offices were basically an apartment they had rented out. And it was actually 2 apartments. And so we had the production staff in one, and we had the writing staff in the other. And I really liked the people that I worked with. I mean, to me, that's the most important thing. You know, I've always said that I would rather write for a crappy show with great people, you know, than a great show with crappy people.
Right.
So much time together in that room, and you know, you really tossing out ideas, and you have to be comfortable with the people that you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And I made some friends on Painkiller Jane that I still have today.
Oh, did they take a little inspiration from the comic book? Because it seemed like there was some divergency there. But then again, I don't think that the Painkiller Jane comic book was all that well developed. So I think the TV series actually went further.
I think they took their inspiration from it, but didn't really feel the need to duplicate it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And
on
Roswell-
Star Trek Voyager.
Go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead, Dan.
On Star Trek Voyager, I believe you initially worked on the writing of the episode Dreadnought, but didn't receive an on-screen credit for that, and then on the episode's Resistance. Can you tell us about how you transitioned to writing for Voyager and what your work on Dreadnought consisted of?
On Dreadnought, I believe I think that came in as a pitch, and then we turned it into a B'Elanna episode. Just to have her kind of confront something from her past, which was always interesting and always kind of reveals character.
Cool. I noticed in the script of Dreadnought, at least in the first draft, I wasn't sure if you worked on that, but it refers to Ensign Wildman as having the first name Karen, whereas she ultimately received the first name Samantha, established later in Voyager's second season in the episode Deadlock. Do you know why that might have been changed?
I gotta think it was just sort of forgetfulness. I don't think it was changed for any reason. It was just, I think sometimes when you name so many characters, sometimes you kind of forget.
Right.
Yeah. The Dreadnought is one of several season 2 episodes that include a scene where crewman Michael Jonas talks covertly with a member of the Kazon. I wondered if you could talk about the roots of the Jonas character, whether you thought the Kazon outstayed their welcome in Star Trek Voyager in general, or speak about that scene in particular. Was it you who wrote it, or someone else, such as Michael Piller or Jerry Taylor?
No, I believe I wrote that scene. I mean, they obviously introduced the the Jonas subplot. As far as the Kazons go, yeah, I wasn't crazy about the Kazons, I gotta say. I mean, it was challenging in Voyager to establish an alien species that we would interact with for any length of time, because the Voyager was going in one direction. You know, we would pass through somebody's space and just keep going. And so, you know, the Kazon were the first sort of recurring aliens that we had, I believe.
Mhm.
And there was only so long that we could stay in that territory, believably. And so we had to kind of contain the Jonas, betrayal storyline, within that sort of reasonable period as well.
Do you have a question, Bob or Maria?
I was wondering about your work on Roswell, as that had to be kind of a different experience from the Star Trek shows as well.
Yes, yes. Well, Ron Moore from Deep Space Nine was on Roswell, and so he brought me in to pitch, and I ended up on staff there. And it was a different experience, set in the real world. Despite the fact that there were aliens, it wasn't a sci-fi universe the same way that Star Trek was. And that was kind of a nice change, just to have one unusual element or sci-fi element to deal with, rather than having to reinvent the universe all the time.
All right.
Is there any show right now that you would just love to do some scripts for? That's
yes.
Be it sci-fi or any genre,
Actually, For All Mankind, I've been watching, which is actually Ron Moore's new show. And it's fantastic. I would love to write for that show.
Awesome. Cool. And we got a question from the internet from Mike Adams. And his question is, where do you submit like story and episode ideas to?
Unfortunately, Star Trek doesn't accept spec scripts anymore.
Yeah.
At the time, when I was there, and I was very lucky because I took advantage of that. At the time, Voyager and Deep Space Nine would accept spec scripts from anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, you would just have to mail it into Paramount, and an intern would read it, and if it was good, they would pass it along to the rest of the staff. And that's how I got in. I mean, I sent in a script like that.
Right.
But as far as I know, nobody does that now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Always thought
recently,
that was always cool that they did do that, because
yeah, definitely.
someone can come up with a really great idea, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got lots of good story ideas from pitches.
I recently read like Alex Kurtzman's guidelines on how you submit pitches, and he's like, it has to be, you have to either have like an attorney or an agent or something like that.
Yes.
If you're going to submit it.
Yeah, I mean, the downside of the open submission policy is that we got sued a lot by people who thought that we had taken their story ideas without giving them credit for it, which we didn't. We bought pitches and we bought, people's scripts all the time. If it was even close to something we were doing, we would go ahead and buy the script just to be sure. But we got sued all the time anyway.
Yeah.
I noticed that in the script of the Voyager episode Innocence, Chakotay says that while aboard the starship Providence, he and his fellow officers were sent to make first contact with an alien species called the Deccanons. However, in the final version of that episode, he instead says, "We were sent on that mission, leaving the ship unnamed." Do you know why that change might have been made?
I don't. All I can think of is that they maybe were using that name for something else, or wanted to use that name for something else, or that there was some kind of, that it didn't clear legally, like maybe there was an actual, battleship that had that name or something.
I've read that the story of the Voyager episode Remember was originally to have been for an episode of The Next Generation. How easy or difficult did you find turning it into a Voyager script instead was?
Well, I found it pretty easy, actually, because the heart of the story was the same. The experience, basically living somebody else's experiences. Obviously it had made sense for a Deanna Troi story because she's an empath. But if we just made the aliens, essentially telepaths instead, then we could give that story to any of our characters. And we decided that it would serve B'Elanna really well. Which I think it did. I think it really was a good story for her.
So I also noticed, Remember is clearly an allegory for the Holocaust, and the episode Retrospect seems to be about date rape. Did any of the other episodes you wrote for Voyager involve allegory? And do you remember if you named any of the characters after actual people?
I didn't name any characters after people. Again, you could probably get in trouble for that legally, and so I think all of the episodes, a lot of them had allegories. A lot of them were either kind of inspired by other stories, like Resistance was initially inspired by Don Quixote. Who had imagined that, Dulcinea, was this really beautiful woman, and that she's, tilting at windmills. And so we wanted to have a character like that. But obviously, you start with kind of the inspiration for a story, and then it takes its own life. And, if you do an allegory like Remember, obviously that was more overt of an allegory. It's pretty obvious what we were referring to. But in every episode, I remember Michael Piller would ask, "What's it about?" Not what happens in the story, but what is it about?
Right.
And you always had to have a good answer for that.
Right.
And so we always tried to have some greater meaning behind it rather than just an adventure story.
Right. And I have a question. You just recently brought up just now Michael Piller, and we interviewed Michael Piller's widow a couple weeks ago, and it was a wonderful interview. And I was just wondering if you can share with us like a fond memory that you have of Michael Piller working with him on the show.
Well, I remember actually I worked with him on Dreadnought of all things.
Okay.
And I remember actually hitting a point in which I was, had kind of run into a wall, and I really wasn't sure what was going to happen in the scene. And I remember sitting in my office with Michael, just kind of banging our heads against the wall. How about this? And that doesn't work. How about that? And just wrestling this thing to the ground, and he, he was always really patient. I mean, it wasn't like, you go do this right now. It was, it was always, we can do something. He was terrific to work for. Okay. And he's the one who was responsible for the open submission policy. He's the one that wanted to keep it going, even if Paramount started to object, again, because of the lawsuits. They didn't want to keep it, but Michael insisted, and he was right.
Awesome. That's cool.
What did you think of Jennifer Leon's performance in Warlord? And do you remember who came up with the idea of the Talaxian Hall program, the Paxo Resort, which is introduced in that episode and reappears in several episodes, including another one that you wrote called Displaced?
Well, I remember that they came up with the holodeck because we wanted, that particular set, because we wanted to have another standing set, something that we didn't have to rebuild for every single episode. And so we decided that, we would have this kind of fantasy, paradise program that we could go and set scenes in and sort of get us off the bridge and, out of engineering every once in a while. And so we wanted to say, what kind of set would we want to spend time in? As far as Jennifer Leon's performance, I thought she was terrific. I thought that was a really challenging ask of an actor,
right?
Especially someone who was used to playing a very sweet and kind of innocent character. To ask her to play this tyrant, this dictator, and you had to be able to see that, she had to be able to convey that just with her performance, and I thought she did it really well.
Both director Andrew Robinson and Belana Torres actress Roxanne Dawson have expressed high approval of your Blood Fever script. Can you tell us a bit about the development of that episode, and specifically how inspired were you during the writing process by the original series episode Amok Time, which introduced such Vulcan concepts as the Kunat Caliphate and Pon farr?
Well, obviously the Amok Time was kind of what we inspired us, because of course we did have a Vulcan character on the show. And so initially the thought was, how do we do how do we do a Pon farr episode of Tuvok and make it interesting and different than what was done before? And the more we talked about it, the more it just seemed that it would just kind of feel like a retread, that we didn't want to do the same story. And that's when we had the idea of, what if it was a different character? Because Vulcans do have some, telepathic abilities. They do the mind meld and that sort of thing.
Right.
And so we wondered, could one of our other characters go through that experience? And that was kind of the turning point of, what made that episode actually happen. And then again, we chose Belana because there's a part of herself that she's always trying to hold down. She's always trying to hold back the Klingon side. And so we thought, well, in an experience like Pon farr, the Klingon side would come out. And we really wanted to explore that part of her, which, again, she portrayed very, very well. That was a lot of fun. I mean, it
So
was
was
fun to
Vorik
explore the Paris
Sorry.
Torres relationship, or the start of the Paris Torres relationship. And to have Paris in the odd position of having to basically hold her back, that he wanted her, couldn't take advantage of her like that. And that was kind of an interesting dance, to show.
So the new Vulcan character that you created, Vorik, was he created for that episode and then like seeded into some of the previous episodes? And also, was he based on the Vulcan Torek from the Next Generation episode Lower Decks? I know he was played by the same actor. I think was it Jerry Taylor's son or something like that.
Yes, he was created for that episode and then put into a couple beforehand, so he didn't just pop up out of nowhere. As far as I know, he wasn't based on that original character, but at least I didn't base him on that. I mean, obviously Jerry Taylor must have had that in mind. But no, as far as I knew, he was an original character.
You have a question, Bob?
Yes, Lisa, I know you also worked on Earth Final Conflict, and I was wondering how much of a challenge that was, because wasn't that also a show that kind of had a conclusion in mind, if I'm not mistaken, as the seasons were going on? So were you kind of harnessed a little bit as to what you were going to do with that show, or, it's been a while, so perhaps I'm mistaken, but I just thought that was probably a very interesting difference from the Star Trek shows, even though it was part of Gene Roddenberry's work.
Mm-hmm. I think I just wrote 1 or maybe 2 episodes for that show, so I wasn't really in on the high level meetings about the direction that the show was going to go, and so I don't really know if they had a fixed endpoint in mind.
Oh, okay. Was it how difficult was it though to do that show?
It was good. It was good. Again, the Roddenberry universe, is always really kind of interesting and layered, and stuff that you can really sink your teeth into as a writer.
I understand the episode Favorite Son on Voyager was written with the idea of having Harry Kim turn out to be an alien, which seems quite a big step for his character. Where did that idea come from, and was it influenced by the Harry Kim character proving not so popular as intended at the beginning of the series?
I don't know if it was about popularity exactly, but we wanted to take a character that we really didn't know that much about. Mm-hmm. We hadn't really explored his background yet. And so, originally the story was that he was going to, discover, alien DNA, that would match, aliens in the Delta Quadrant, and he was going to meet his family, essentially. Mm-hmm. But I guess the higher ups thought that would be kind of not very interesting to have scenes with, Harry and Grandma. And so they decided that they wanted to have, attractive young women instead. And so, he was, they wanted to have his DNA for a different reason. And it wasn't about family after all. Mm-hmm. Which I thought honestly was kind of a bummer. I mean, I would have liked to write the episode where he actually found home, and then had to kind of choose between, do I stay here with his new family, or do I continue with my Voyager family? Right. I would have liked to write that.
Right. And kind of going off of that, is there, like, looking back, is there like any characters that you would have liked to explore more, or a different aspect of like a character you would have liked to explore more, like to write?
Well, with Janeway, we'd always established that she had previously been a science officer, and that's kind of how she came up through the ranks. Mm-hmm. And I think that came out a couple of times during episodes, that she was really interested in the science, but I would have liked to maybe explore a little bit more of that with her.
Okay.
I wondered if you could tell us a bit about writing the episodes Revulsion and Scientific Method.
Okay, Revulsion. Revulsion was, obviously a doctor episode. We wanted to see, if he encountered another hologram that was kind of in a similar position, again, how would that reflect on the doctor's own situation? And so we wanted to take a character that, hologram that maybe had once been essentially, an emergency hologram and was isolated and had gone crazy. And so it was sort of the doctor's greatest fear in a way, life. And then we cast Leland Orser, who was terrific. And we made it a little, I know that we modeled the character a little bit after Norman Bates in Psycho. Again, somebody who was very isolated and had kind of turned in on themselves in a way, and gotten a little unhinged in the process. And I'm sorry, what was the other one you were asking about?
Scientific Method.
Oh yeah, Scientific Method was fun. That was a bottle show, which usually was kind of the dreaded bottle show. You know, it was usually not as much fun to write because you just had to stay on the standing sets, and you couldn't have too much guest cast, and so it was usually a very contained story and generally not as much fun to write. But then we came up with Scientific Method, where we had aliens, performing experiments on the crew, and that was fun. I remember there was a scene where Seven is in an elevator or a turbo lift, and we see an alien sticking probes in her eyes, and she can see them and has to pretend that she can't. And I thought that was a great moment for Jerry Ryan, just to show her kind of sweating but not really showing it, and I thought that was great.
Cool. So I noticed in the line of dialogue from the script of Revulsion, the Doctor told B'Elanna Torres, quote, "You might consider a career in medicine. You'd be the first Klingon to," but he then didn't finish that sentence. How would you have ended that line?
Survive medical school? Or to get through medical school without killing anybody.
Yeah, there you go.
Revulsion includes Tom Paris becoming a nurse. Do you remember where that idea came from?
Well, again, we wanted to kind of explore, different sides of our characters. And so for Paris, being a pilot, he was kind of the hotshot pilot. And so to kind of force him into a more subservient role to the Doctor and a role that required some empathy, that's like a good way to explore his character.
Do you think Harry Kim went on to regret his decision in Revulsion to turn down Seven's invitation to copulate?
Yes, I believe he did.
I saw that episode just the other night, too.
Yeah.
Cool. I noticed there's a Starfleet officer called Crewman Gennaro, spelled Gennaro, in the episode Displaced, as well as mentioned in the script of Scientific Method, though the latter reference was ultimately changed to refer to Ensign Wildman instead. Do you recall anything about this, such as where the name Gennaro came from or why the change to Wildman was made?
I don't actually really remember where that came from. The change was probably made because we wanted to keep Ensign Wildman kind of alive in the mind of the viewer.
Okay. I noticed quite a few scripts mentioned Ensign Wildman. I thought it was quite cool. So perhaps you could tell us a bit about working on Message in a Bottle and Retrospect. What was it like to work with Brian Fuller in the script for Retrospect?
Well, let's see. The first one was, what was the first one you asked me?
Message in a Bottle.
Message in a Bottle. Again, everybody loved writing for the Doctor, and so writing a Doctor story, was a bunch of fun.
Right.
And we knew that we wanted to have, just a very brief contact with the Alpha Quadrant. Again, to kind of, remind everybody what our long-term goal was and what home really was. And then I remember a lot of discussion about what the other hologram would be like. What would be a good foil for the Doctor? Would it be somebody who was very upright and rule following? Would it be somebody who was even crazier than the Doctor was? And so we ended up with somebody, obviously once we cast Andy Dick, the answer was somebody even crazier than the Doctor. So once we had cast him, we ended up rewriting that part quite a bit for him.
Cool.
And working with Brian Fuller was fantastic. He's one of the friends that I made on Voyager that I still have now. He's just a great guy, and we really enjoyed working on that episode together.
Cool.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like mine is,
Bob, you've got-
my question is not so much about like an episode. I was just curious. What are your thoughts about the Voyager documentary? Over $1 million raised, and like broke the documentary record. And like, I mean, that's a lot of love for Voyager.
That is.
That's a lot of love. Have they reached out to you about like contributing anything or?
Not yet. No.
I mean, you worked on this show. It's received a lot of love. I mean, I would be touched if I worked on the show. That
would have thought they'd interview you, or include you in the documentary.
Yeah, I'm guessing that they will reach out at some point, but not so far.
Yeah.
But I am really pleased with all the love the Voyager still has. I mean, I've actually done several interviews this year about Voyager. I'm not sure why all of a sudden it's back on people's radar, but it seems to be. And people are kind of looking back at it with, I think, more fondness even than it received at the time. At the time, people kind of thought maybe it was a copy of Next Generation. And I think that over time, people have realized that it really was its own show, and the characters were distinctive.
And you see that with the documentary, over $1 million. I mean, it speaks for itself. So
yes, it does.
Yeah.
Did you have a question, Bob?
Yeah, I was wondering if there was any ideas that you had that you didn't get to explore in Voyager that you'd love to possibly incorporate into either Star Trek Picard if you had the opportunity, or Discovery, or if there's something that just came up that's saying that you thought, oh, well, this would be good, a good fit for that particular show, any concepts?
I don't really have any ideas floating around from Voyager. I really got a chance to tell the stories I wanted to tell there.
Okay.
So the episode, the Omega Directive, established the highly volatile Omega particle. Were you aware that during the most recent season of Star Trek Discovery, season 4, many fans speculated that that particle, the Omega particle, might turn out to be the cause of the burn? Do you watch newly released Star Trek, and if so, what's your opinion? What's your opinion of those productions?
I do watch Discovery, and the burn connection annoyed me, but sure, why not? I mean, they ended up explaining it in a different way, obviously. But I really like Discovery. I like Michael's character.
Yes, she's great.
And I like the people that they've surrounded her with. Tilly is a really interesting character. Booker, obviously, I like him being her sort of love interest. He's again a three-dimensional character that isn't just love interest of the week.
Yeah. So if approached, would you be interested in like writing for Discovery?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, I'd love to.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I have a non-Star Trek question. I saw, and make sure, I hope this is right information, because I messed up earlier today. Bubba, how was your experience on Jeopardy?
Oh, that was so much fun.
Yeah. I wanted because you're the first person I've been able to talk to who've won like multiple. You won five shows, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how was that experience?
It was great. It was really intense. Because most people don't realize that they actually film 5 episodes a day.
Oh, wow.
On Jeopardy. Yeah. They film, and the way that I was chosen to be on, I was chosen to be a contestant on basically the Monday episode. Mm-hmm. And so I filmed 5 episodes of Jeopardy in one day.
Wow.
All of those games were consecutive for me. Right. And it was really intense, but just amazing experience. I think that must be one of the best days of my life. Seriously.
Wow. Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, congratulations winning five episodes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe you can describe a little bit about Alex,
Alex is great. You really got the sense that he wanted you to do well. Mm-hmm. That he didn't want anybody to stumble or to make a fool of themselves, that he really wanted you to present your best self and to do as well as you could on the show. And so you really kind of got the feeling that he was rooting for you, which was nice.
Awesome.
Oh, cool.
Bob mentioned, asked you earlier about Hercules. I remember reading that I think Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orsi worked on that series as well. So I wondered if you actually worked with them or if that was more indirect.
No, I did work with them.
Oh, right.
We did sit in the writers' room together.
How was that?
Again, it was just fun. I mean, nobody took that show with dead seriousness. It was always kind of a tongue in cheek sort of experience, and so that made for a fun writers' room.
So thank you very much for coming on to the show.
Oh, it was fun. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
it.
Yes.
Uh,
and to
where
our
can-
audience, please remember to like and subscribe to the Scotch Trekker. Smash that like button.
And where online and social media can fans find you? Are you on Twitter or?
I'm on Facebook and Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
I think technically I'm on Instagram, but I never actually post anything there, so that's kind of useless. I'm on LinkedIn. But yeah, Facebook and Twitter is really where I spend most of my social media time.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
So thanks very much for the interview. To the audience, we'll see you again next week. Bye for now. Track you later.
Take care.
Okay.